who won the Democratic Lieutenant Governor debate. From a concerned wife of the Virgin Islands, the three Democratic candidates for Lieutenant Governor met at the St. Croix Educational Complex for a debate centered on the responsibilities of the Lieutenant Governor's office, including property taxes, insurance, banking, disaster preparedness, business development, government modernization, and public accountability. Senator Novelle E. Francis, Jr., running with Lieutenant Governor Tregenza Roach, presented himself as the experienced candidate prepared to continue and expand work already underway. Senate President Milton E. Potter, running with Delegate Stacey Plaskett, argued that government systems are failing ordinary Virgin Islanders and that the next administration must be willing to intervene more aggressively. Rodney Moorehead, running with former Sen. Donna Frett-Gregory, positioned himself as the management-focused alternative who would emphasize staffing, digitization, workforce development, and faster results. The Virgin Islands Consortium. This analysis is based solely on the candidate's performance during this debate. It is not an endorsement or a prediction of who will win the election. To judge the debate fairly, I looked at three major categories commonly used to evaluate political debate performance: substance, rebuttal, and delivery and credibility. 1. Substance. On substance, Novelle Francis Jr. had the strongest overall performance. Francis demonstrated the broadest familiarity with the divisions and responsibilities of the Lieutenant Governor's office. He discussed expanding the street addressing initiative, digitizing government services, developing technology dashboards, improving property appraisal training, addressing probate delays, strengthening transparency, and attracting more affordable insurance products. His strongest answers came when discussing modernization and land administration. Francis connected the property tax problem to unresolved probate cases and argued that families can remain trapped for decades without clear title to inherited property. He also proposed exploring whether the Virgin Islands could pool its insurance market with Puerto Rico, the British Virgin Islands, or another jurisdiction to create a larger customer base and attract better insurance products. His answer on transparency was also one of the most detailed of the night. Francis proposed strengthening the Inspector General's office and Attorney General's office, creating an anti-corruption task force, establishing a public transparency website, and providing regular reports on government finances and disaster recovery projects. The Virgin Islands Consortium. Potter also had strong substance, particularly when discussing banking, employee development, and disaster preparedness. His proposal to hold a banking summit and deliberately recruit additional financial institutions was one of the more specific economic ideas presented. Potter argued that increased competition could pressure existing banks to offer better lending products to homeowners and small businesses. He also correctly emphasized that modernization requires more than purchasing technology. Employees must be properly trained, compensated, and included in the process. Potter's disaster preparedness answer was another strong moment. He focused on the Lieutenant Governor's responsibility for banking and insurance, and called for year-round education about underinsurance, regular discussions with financial institutions, and temporary payment relief programs for residents affected by disasters. However, Potter sometimes spent more time describing what was wrong than explaining exactly how his administration would carry out the proposed changes. Moorehead offered several practical ideas. His strongest proposal was creating an appraisal apprenticeship program beginning in the high schools, allowing students to learn from experienced appraisers while helping the territory build a local workforce. He also emphasized fully staffing the Lieutenant Governor's office, improving data collection, exploring neobanks, and creating career pathways that connect students directly to available jobs. Moorehead's answers were generally sensible, but they were not always fully developed. He frequently identified the problem without explaining the legal authority, financing, or specific timeline needed to implement his solution. Substance winner, Novelle Francis Jr. 2. Rebuttal. Milton Potter won the rebuttal category. His strongest exchange came during the discussion of the Public Officials Compensation Commission. Potter accused Francis, who was Senate President at the time, of knowing that the Commission's report had been submitted and understanding that the recommendations could take effect if the legislature failed to act. Francis responded that the legislature was closed during Tropical Storm Ernesto and said he accepted responsibility for anything that occurred under his leadership. Potter then returned with a more specific challenge, referring to a reported email record showing that Francis was among the recipients of the report. Whether voters agreed with Potter's full interpretation or not, he used the exchange effectively. He identified a specific inconsistency, followed Francis's response, and returned directly to the issue of honesty and accountability. Local reporting from January 2025 also reported that an email showed Francis among the recipients, although the broader legality and submission process remained disputed. The Virgin Islands Consortium. Potter also effectively challenged Francis's argument that existing government programs were already helping small businesses. Potter's response was that announcing programs is not enough if ordinary residents are not actually benefiting from them. That became the central theme of his performance. Government should be judged by whether its programs reach the public, not simply by whether they exist. Francis did his fair share of strong rebuttals. He challenged Potter's absences from the territory, questioned his disaster recovery oversight, and defended his own record as a senator, Senate president, and business owner. Some of those rebuttals were effective, especially when Francis accepted responsibility for events that occurred during his Senate presidency. However, some of Francis's responses were personal. He separately accused the Plaskett-Potter campaign of being beholden to large donors and characterized Potter's presentation as a scripted Washington operative speech. Moorehead generally avoided the conflict between Francis and Potter. His decision to redirect the conversation toward solutions helped him appear calm and disciplined. However, in a category specifically evaluating rebuttal, repeatedly declining to challenge the other candidates left him with fewer memorable moments. Rebuttal winner, Milton Potter. 3. Delivery and credibility. Milton Potter narrowly had the strongest combined performance in delivery and credibility. Potter maintained a clear and consistent argument throughout the debate. Government systems are not working well enough for ordinary Virgin Islanders, and residents should not be asked to accept another 4 years of the same approach. His delivery was forceful without being as personally combative as Francis's. He spoke most confidently when discussing employee development, banking access, accountability, and the difference between announcing a program and ensuring that people actually benefit from it. Potter also delivered the strongest closing statement. He tied together problems involving WAPA, schools, healthcare, and the cost of living and asked why residents were still suffering if government initiatives were working as successfully as described. The argument was repetitive at times, but it was focused and easy to understand. The Virgin Islands Consortium. Francis was arguably the most commanding speaker on the stage. His years in law enforcement and the legislature were evident in his confidence, familiarity with government, and willingness to defend his record. He often sounded like someone who already understood the daily operations of the office he was seeking. However, his credibility was weakened by one factual exaggeration. He also suggested that the Plaskett-Potter campaign would be beholden to large donors, an accusation he did not substantiate during the debate. Still, that exchange did not define or overshadow his overall performance. Moorehead came across as sincere, calm, and approachable. His background as an educator, administrator, union leader, and mediator supported the management-focused case he was attempting to make. His weakness was not credibility, but that several answers remained broad and did not establish as clearly as the other candidates why his approach was uniquely stronger. Delivery and credibility winner, Milton Potter. Fact-check concern. Francis said nearly $1 billion had been collected in property taxes under Roach. Francis stated that under Lieutenant Governor Tregenza Roach, the territory had collected almost $1 billion in property taxes. Official Lieutenant Governor's Office revenue figures show actual real property tax collections of approximately $46.5 million in 2019, $65.7 million in 2020, $54.4 million in 2021, $57.7 million in 2022, $54 million in 2023, $62.8 million in 2024. That totals approximately $341 million from fiscal years 2019 through 2024. Even after adding the office's approximately $64 million estimate for fiscal year 2025, the total would be about $405 million, nowhere near $1 billion. Francis may have intended to refer to a broader category of revenue collected by the entire Lieutenant Governor's office, but he specifically said property taxes. As stated, the claim was inaccurate. The figures can be found in the Office of the Lieutenant Governor's FY 2026 budget hearing testimony, submitted to the Virgin Islands Legislature, in the table titled Actual Revenues by Division, Fiscal Years 2019-2024, on page 32 of the Official Budget Testimony PDF. Overall debate winner. Based on substance, rebuttal and delivery and credibility, Milton Potter won the Lieutenant Governor debate. This ranking is my assessment based on the three categories above. It is not an official result, scientific poll, or prediction of the Democratic primary. Francis demonstrated the strongest knowledge of the Lieutenant Governor's office and offered the broadest range of office-specific proposals. He was also arguably the most commanding speaker on the stage. However, his inaccurate property tax figure and a few political accusations that were not substantiated during the debate slightly weakened an otherwise strong performance. Those moments did not define or overshadow his overall presentation. Moorehead presented himself as the calm, credible, and management-focused alternative. He offered practical ideas involving appraiser training, staffing, digitization, insurance data, and workforce development. However, some of his answers remained broad, and his decision to avoid most of the direct exchanges left him less competitive in the rebuttal category. Potter had the strongest overall balance. He presented substantive proposals, delivered the most effective rebuttals, and maintained the clearest central argument throughout the night. His message that government programs should be judged by whether they actually reach ordinary Virgin Islanders was consistent from his opening statement through his closing argument. Final ranking: 1. Milton Potter, 2. Novelle E. Francis Jr., 3. Rodney Moorehead. The debate presented three different arguments for leadership. Francis argued experience and continuity. Potter argued accountability and change. Moorehead argued management and results. All three candidates had credible moments, and the outcome could reasonably depend on what voters prioritize in a lieutenant governor. From a concerned wife of the Virgin Islands, subscribe to receive more VI-related updates like these.